welcome to batch 3. We have 15 companies in this batch. I sent you a summary of each of the various teams. Rich on your team has been already engaged with a handful of them, and there's some great synergies that are already in play. But as you know, with today's roundtable, it's a great session for all of the teams to get a level set on all the great things that F5 is doing, and then as we did last time, for me to kind of pick into some of your history and perspectives just on the industry generally, on this convergence of enterprise networking, carriers, and all that fun stuff. And like it was for our last call, I think it's going to be a really fun discussion. So with that, I'd love to turn it over. Oh, by the way, we're recording today's session because some folks are able to make it and some aren't, and we put this on our Dropbox site. It doesn't go anywhere else for others to listen in, if that's okay.
That's perfect.
And so with that, I'll turn it over to yourself, my friend, to kind of kick us off.
All right, cool. And I have a couple. I'll do my best to not make this a sales pitch. It is.
Being a sales guy, that's a huge deal. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, this is not a sales pitch, but I am trying to tee up. So I'm going to step through these slides real quick, and really what I want to tee up is the problems that we're addressing as a company. And so as you're listening to this, think of this more as the problems and the solutions, not so much as us, really trying to sell something. So because that's absolutely not the intention here. So thanks again, Jim, and to the entire Open Innovation Lab and to all of the companies that have recently joined. I'm James Feger. I'm the general manager of the service provider business here at F5. I've been with the company now for, I guess, coming up on 3 years. And I know Jim and I'll probably talk a little bit about my background later in the presentation or later in the discussion. But one of the things that what we're really observing, and this goes without saying, honestly, I think we all understand it, but putting some real numbers behind it matters. There is an enormous amount of complexity being introduced into application ecosystems for our customers. And when I'm talking about our customers at F5, I'm actually talking about all of our customers, our enterprise customers, our government customers, our telco customers, healthcare, financial services, all of them. These are problems that are real, regardless of the industry that they're in. Security exposures are getting worse and worse, and it's an interesting trend for us because more and more companies are focused on security approaches, security threats, security threat mitigations. Yet security exposure continues to increase. Breaches continue to get more and more in depth. 2020 was no different. In fact, I think we saw in the last several months, we saw some of the largest companies in the world exposed in new and interesting ways. And I truly do mean new and interesting ways. These are things that are, I find it interesting. It's sad and devastating the impact of these breaches, but as a technologist, it's always interesting to see how the mind of the bad actors is evolving and how the tools are evolving. And part of that is inadequate visibility. If you think about the deployments that exist today and how applications are built and how services are built, there's an enormous amount of unmonitored, unknown code. And that is the honeypot for all of these bad actors. And so trying to put this into pictures a little bit, how many people does this picture resonate with from an organizational perspective? Many of the companies here on this call are probably looking to solve some of these challenges or insert their offerings into some of these areas themselves. And when I step back and think about my time actually as a customer of a vendor when I was at CenturyLink, this is exactly what we dealt with. I had the DevOps and part of NetOps. And even within my own organization, we had a lot of confusion as to who was doing what was getting deployed, how is it being secured, how is it being operationalized. And essentially what we're finding is inconsistency of technologies across environments and teams is an unsustainable approach to these businesses. It creates limited and ineffective scale because things are getting manually stitched together in order to be agile. And this results in a much larger attack footprint. If you think about it, these three cloud environments or edge environments are all really duplicates of each other, just in different geographies, possibly ran by different organizations and possibly secured by different organizations. And part of the biggest issue here is a lack of visibility into all of this. And so from an F5 perspective, what we're really focused on is helping companies transform and solve some of these problems. Many of you, now I'm gonna make an assumption here to the team. When I joined F5, I honestly knew F5 as a load balancing company. Many of you probably saw F5 and said, "Oh, they're a load balancing company." And while that is our history, that is definitely not what we are known for today, and it's not what we want to be known for in the future. We love the load balancers. We believe that the product is great. We think the load balancing technology actually affords us a couple of opportunities in helping with solving some of these complexities, and I'll talk about that now. And so, thinking about those pictures and how are we going about solving some of these problems, we really kind of took a step back and said, what does it start with? And it starts with the traditional apps, the applications that businesses run on all day long today, that we've grown to know and love, and even kind of probably joke about as we're evolving into the world of edge computing and 5G and IoT. But these traditional apps are going to be around a long time. If we had the recent stats of how many mainframes still exist and do things that all of our lives depend on, it would be staggering, probably a little saddening, but also staggering in terms of the reality. And so with our old product, our legacy product, Big IP, we're continuing to work in the space because traditional apps remain the dominant application architecture for most organizations. They run the most critical, mission critical things. And they're really difficult to refactor. They're still there because they're just difficult to refactor. That's why mainframes are still around. It's not because there's a group of people hanging on to the technology. They're probably being stuck to the technology. But companies are trying to evolve. They're trying to get to modern environments. And so to deliver on these customer expectations of extraordinary digital experiences, fast and customized services, organizations have really been working to go to modern app delivery at scale. Kubernetes, containers, serverless, lightweight APIs, and microservices. But this is orders of magnitude more complex, and I would say it's probably the main driver that we are observing that creates that box on the right-hand side of the slide, which this is the exact same box that was duplicated 3 times on the prior slide, depending on the deployment, public cloud, private cloud, or edge. And so as we're seeing this shift to modern apps, you've got the traditional apps that now need to start talking to the modern apps. The modern apps are getting deployed in such a way that they're trying to be speed to market, very customized, very lightweight. And this is increasing an attack footprint like we've never seen, and it's creating those jump through points that's allowing the breaches to really proliferate through organizations. And so then we start thinking, okay, well, how are organizations trying to secure across the board, right? So for us, we see this as, okay, we have our traditional app infrastructure that we've, F5's candidly been known for. We have our new modern app development infrastructure with NGINX. And then we went out and we said, how do we bring all of this together? And we look at it by saying, well, traditionally, security in this environment was done at the network perimeter. You thought, well, block the traffic before it comes in. All is good. All is well. But attackers have been moving to different vectors. And because of custom services and digital experiences and all these other things, more and more services are actually being exposed intentionally to the world, which, again, opens up the attack footprint. And so a stat that we've come across is 90% of current security incidents and 50% of all total breaches are actually involving app security now. It used to be it was the insider threat and it was just a breach to a badly configured firewall. Now it's actually the apps are being attacked. You think about like DNS redirects, DNS hijacks, fraud, click-throughs with credential stuffing. All of this is targeting specific applications. And so for us, what we're trying to do is stitch all of these different services together to actually create an application-centric security portfolio. These last couple items here is unlocking the value of App Insights. One of the things that this complexity brings is that lack of visibility. Downtime of applications or unknown access or manipulation of code costs billions of dollars every single year. And one of the things that F5 has been able to help our customers with is we are exposed to 564 petabytes of data through F5 products on a daily basis. What I mean by that is F5 products sit in line with 564 petabytes of traffic every single day. Obviously, that's a global number. That's a rolled up number. But because of that and where we sit in these environments, we're helping our customers get the application visibility that they're looking for so that they can start enhancing their security stance in their portfolio. The last thing I want to cover here, and the reason I'm bringing this one up specifically, and this may actually sound a little bit like a sales pitch, Jim, and again, I'm sorry, but we're super excited about this. We recently closed an acquisition of Volterra, which is a solution for adaptive applications. And the reason I'm bringing this up here is because of our membership in the lab and what we've been working on, especially what we recently did with the farms in Snohomish County. Got it. Nailed it. We think there's actually a play here. And so, I encourage everybody to kind of go out and check out Volterra. If there is, work back with my team, Rich, to see if it's something we want to start leveraging with the lab. But essentially think of Volterra as a SaaS platform for solving, candidly, a lot of the things we just called out. Reducing the operational complexity at the edge, better end user performance, faster time to improve value. This is essentially a platform. So we have the Volt Stack, which is a platform deployment, edge deployment product. And then we have Volt Mesh, which brings in all of your application security, all of your traffic management, all your AI, your visibility. And then we have Volt Console, which is really the management platform, single pane of glass. And the reason I think this is actually exciting for the lab is it's actually built, the Volterra built in partnership with a lot of our actual existing lab partners as well, VMware, for example. And so we're seeing a lot of collaboration between already existing companies with the lab. And what it does is it's providing essentially a quick test, quick stand up, quick use of a platform with full application security. So if you're focused on a specific application, whether it be 5G core or IoT analytics or smart sensors, and you're looking for ways to deploy this with the lab, this could be that play. From an F5 perspective, we actually see it as a much bigger jump into what we're calling Edge 2.0 and helping bridge the gap between app deployment, public cloud, on-prem cloud, and what we call, the edge computing that a lot of these companies are looking for, especially in the sense of IoT, smart campuses, smart fields. So I'll stop there. With my quick, it was supposed to be 5 minutes. I think I'm at 12. So you should have known better, Jim. But
no, it's actually really good, James. And if you don't mind, on this particularly, I'd love to ask a question or two.
Yeah.
Because you hit a nerve in, at least for what we're trying to accomplish through like Project Geneva and sort of like blurring these lines of the edge and private clouds and public clouds and all that fun stuff. Volterra means a lot for VMware's application security strategy longer term. And you touched on Edge 2.0. I'd love to get your sense for those who may not be too familiar. What's the difference in your view or F5's view between Edge 1 or 1.0 to Edge 2.0? What are those core differences, and how are acquisition plays like Volterra and Shape and others shaping your product journey into where the opportunity is long term?
Yeah, good question. So, Edge 1.0, depends on who you talk to, candidly. Our view of this from an Edge 1.0 perspective was it started off as a basic CDN. Like I need to get a bunch of traffic distributed everywhere. Latency mattered, edge locations mattered, and so let's think about how I can get static content or more recently even streaming content to the consumer. With the evolution of things like sensors and AI and all the things that we believe are coming with the MEC and 5G, Edge 1.0 started to evolve kind of organically from just a basic CDN to then having layers of app security, different service offerings. A lot of you look at the some of these edge players. You've got DDoS solutions and DNS services and all of these things, but they were all bolted together, and they were bolted together in a way that started reintroducing operational complexity.
Yeah.
And I think that's candidly, it's part of the evolution. It's part of how technology evolves. You're always going to be dealing with that, and nobody's immune to that. What Edge 2.0 does a little bit differently for our customers, and our belief is it actually is seeking out to not do any sort of true lock-in. With Edge 1.0, you kind of pick your poison, and that's the path you're going. With Edge 2.0, and in particular, what we're trying to do with Volterra is we actually do want you to be able to have true multi-cloud. You can host it with our edge locations and our own network that we have with Volterra. You can host it in private clouds, public clouds. But the point is that we're really looking for that common security approach, that common control plane, and that common management approach. And that really starts helping consolidate your services, help with policy and observability, trying to actually tackle the operational impacts of what multi-cloud brings to these organizations. And so for us, Edge 2.0 is really rooted in common security, common management, common deployment models, regardless of what the underlying infrastructure is.
Yeah, and if you remember way back when, I think CenturyLink actually had a play in this, right, from a VPN service level. Edge, in addition to everything you said for CDN, which is spot on, Edge 1.0 for me was your atypical branch office, if you remember those days.
Yeah.
And we're kind of doing branch office all over again, but instead of setting up a secure pipe between, let's say, a centralized data center or wherever the apps are running to where an edge location is, we're actually moving a lot more of the application footprint. It's a lot more of a dynamic move in branch to where Edge 2.0 is going, as you've pointed out.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, that, back in my past life, it's MPLS VPNs, right? You had this kind of, all these branch locations, MPLS circuits back into the main backbone, and you had, kind of your quote unquote private network. But again, your security still wasn't really at the app level there. It was still really network level. It was very good. I think it was actually quite strong. And where things started getting a little bit more complex is when the user experience started outpacing the security and application development process. And so then things like SD-WAN became popular. And well, now we're adding inline firewalls and inline application level rules. And while that was good, it was still this model of everything must run through these locations type of thing. SD-WAN, while it is actually still experiencing a good life and scaling well, we're already talking about the next generation of this with SASE and serverless and microservices on demand wherever you are. And so I think you're exactly right. It's the evolution. It's the moving of what you call edge. I mean, I got into a pretty heavy debate on what edge is. Is Edge the first location in your own office? Is it your edge of your public cloud? Is it, is it your data center?
Well, so I think it's about 3 weeks from now, and thanks to our friend Shelly at VMware, we were able to invite on Jeff Weil, who is the CIO and digital customer and retail technology group at Starbucks. And so I was prepping him for the session on this, James, and I said to him, "Hey, what do you think the edge is?" And he said it's the thousands of retail locations we have today.
Yep,
that's our edge. And so they're contemplating private 5G at every retail location worldwide, right? And so that was really interesting. And I asked him, so why go down the private 5G route? And there's a number of different things which I don't want to steal his thunder on, but one of the things that he did kind of point on is that he essentially said, look, we're trying to make the devices that run in those stores as dumb as possible, because we can protect the application. We don't have to worry about threats on devices themselves. We want to be able to essentially manage the application pieces. And so that was really interesting. And everything you touched on with Volterra is really, at least from a customer perspective, was kind of in line with how he's thinking of the world for Starbucks going forward.
That's exactly right. And we see that everywhere. it's funny. You go from, if you think about the evolution of connectivity, especially in large businesses, retail, enterprise campuses, whatever, we went from dumb bridges and everything centralized to heavily distributed intelligence everywhere, to now this kind of middle ground where the devices and the intelligence has to appear to be in the store, but realistically it's somewhere else, because the applications are being hosted from multiple edge locations. They're synchronizing, and but from a user experience standpoint, it doesn't matter if they're sitting at home or if they're sitting inside of that retail store. It still feels the same to them.
You bet. So let's shift gears here for a second, because from your heritage as F5, security has been a cornerstone of all of your product offerings, and started with a little bit load balancing piece. And I think it was last year or the year before, I think it was last year that you F5 acquired Shape for over $1 billion. Security is one of those nebulous areas that is kind of everywhere, and then it's not. There's just so many different areas of that. I'd love to get your sense, and this is really for a few of our companies on today's call, like Attila, that how are you guys thinking about security? Where are you kind of putting your bets? You mentioned application security, so that's great. But are there any other sort of nuanced areas that are obvious to you because you're inside of F5, but maybe not so obvious on the outside?
Yeah, which when you mentioned Shape specifically, so application security also means a lot of things, and depending on what type of environment we're deployed in, it can mean different things. And so because you mentioned Shape, I'll focus on Shape for a moment, because I actually think it's actually a pretty cool use case. Shape focuses on anti-bot and anti-fraud primarily. There's a couple other things that Shape does that's, I think, really cool, but those are the main use cases that we see our customers consuming. So for example, Shape can identify human traffic from automated malicious traffic. So if you think about like credential stuffing, where a list of credentials are out on the dark web, they start getting used to start hitting all of these different sites to gain access. Those are done with scripts and bots and everything else. Shape can help identify that and start mitigating that automatically. But the other cool thing is that Shape has the ability to actually look for malicious human traffic and identify it from real human traffic. And so, through AI, it can look for patterns and does matching to understand if this is somebody simply trying to guess often, or somebody that's just legitimately confused and doesn't remember how to get into something. One example that we have from a U.S. enterprise, massive company that has gift cards, for example. They have whatever gift cards. If they were to be transformed into like the holdings of their gift cards, if you were to look at the value of those gift cards, they would be listed in the top 15 banks in the world is the value of these outstanding gift cards. And when they started using Shape, they had a 90% reduction in traffic trying to access their gift card sites to do confirmations or redeem gift cards. And they also happen to be a public cloud customer. So if you think about reducing your public cloud traffic by 90%, just from fraudulent activity, it's a massive impact. And I think it's the visibility. They had no idea. That amount of traffic was being generated from non-human activity trying to access gift card information. And so it circles back to massive company, lots of customers. Everything gets lost in the noise when you look at traffic graphs and server graphs and API calls. But when you start putting some intelligence around it and you start looking at what the traffic is and you start doing matching and start mitigating, the numbers become real very, very quickly.
Interesting. Wow. I'm going to stop here in case anyone from the startup group has any questions they'd like to ask. I have a few more, but I don't want to cannibalize too much of the time. Any open questions from anybody?
Yeah. Hey, James, this is Peter Doherty from AntisNet. How are you doing today? Good. So you may not have seen our background. We develop new forms, a sensor platform, essentially for cloud-native containerized environments that allows you to get deep introspection into traffic. So we're on the bleeding edge of some of these next generation infrastructure here. But a couple of times in your presentation and in your slides, you obviously a lot of the functions and value you all provide are based upon getting telemetry from the underlying infrastructure. That's kind of what we specialize in. But the way we see it is, there's a huge and yawning gap now with cloud native environments, containerized environments where all the underlying functions and resources are ephemeral. And then obviously the adoption of TLS 1.3 and encrypted, more powerful forms of encryption that are kind of running against the traditional players in this space, right? They're preventing them from getting the telemetry and the deep visibility. Again, that's our investment thesis. I'd just like to get your perspective on that, the challenges that Volterra, say, or even Shape Security face with the evolution of the cloud technologies and TLS and all that. Do you have a perspective on that?
I do. I actually have a perspective. So I don't think it's been solved yet. So I'm actually interested in learning more about what you're doing.
Good.
I can tell you.
We got a solution for you.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I find our customers facing right now, particularly in the telco space, this knowledge I'm about to share is actually more focused on the telco space. I believe it's a technology challenge. So I think all companies will face this. Is they're used to the telemetry from the old architectures because it was easy to do port mirrors and tap wires
and all that.
Get all this stuff right. What we're finding with the telcos is they're moving to a telco cloud, their own cloud environments, even partnering up with the likes of Red Hats and VMwares and the players in that space. Is they're losing visibility for their applications, and they're losing visibility even for their network stuff that they're deploying into these environments. And I don't think a lot of them thought about that early on in the process. And it goes back to those multiple development shops and operation shops on the slide that I have. So I think there's a couple of interesting use cases where if you're deployed inside of the container or inside of the pods, and you have that visibility before the encryption kicks in,
yes,
that's gold. I think that's gold.
That's specifically one of the big functions we provide. Is our agents could slip between the protected space, the kernel, and the encryption engine, and really intercept the traffic either before it's encrypted or after, and serve it up in a secure way for analytics. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting space. I would temper that with that's also the same space that the attackers are going to try to get to now. And so when I'm always looking at the glass on both sides of it, which by the way, all glasses are full because air counts. And so, if it's not water, it's air. But the idea here is that I think with these native deployments and the encryption and all of the security that comes with that, all well and good. But then when we start kind of peeling that layer back because, oh gosh, we now no longer know how much traffic is going here, what kind of traffic it is. And some companies are required by state laws or government laws to know what's going on. And so they have to peel that back. And then all of a sudden, that's where the attackers are looking to go. So
that's where we got our start, was lawful intercept way back when. But yeah, you're right. All right. I would love to follow up with you. Thank you.
I think Pete, you and Rich are connected already. If not, I'll make sure of it offline.
Cool.
Hey, James, one of the questions that we had talked about in the last session you did for Batch 2, I'd like to bring it up again, is something that I think we all sort of see ourselves, which is this blurring of lines, right? Where the network is not just the transport layer anymore. It's really becoming an application, a way for applications to kind of reach all corners of the world. And it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like everything F5 is looking at today and kind of where it wants to go in the future is assuming that applications are just going to be mobile. They're absolutely going to be mobile. So it again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you guys aren't drawing any lines around, hey, an app sits in a public cloud versus a hybrid cloud versus multi-carrier versus on a device or a branch, whatever. You're just assuming that apps are going to be kind of ubiquitously everywhere and anywhere where they need to be, right? Is that the right way of thinking about how you're seeing this world?
Yeah, we believe so. I mean, our acquisition of Volterra, I think, actually cements that a little bit, and it goes back to our Edge 2.0 belief is workloads will need to move based on whatever the demand is, and the demand could be financial or it could be technical. And so there's a multi-tiered approach to Edge. There's a multi-tiered approach to cloud. And you're actually seeing that with a lot of the public cloud companies, but a lot of the public cloud companies are now approaching these large enterprises and service providers. There's been a lot of news about partnerships from large cloud companies and massive telcos about the deals they're striking together. And it's a combination of, okay, this application can run in the public cloud. It's deemed worthy, whatever their requirements are. It works for public cloud. But these over here may need to move on to a private cloud for another set of requirements. But those conditions may change. And so, a lot of flexing of scale and size, a lot of drawing back and, cost dynamics, moving apps to where the cost efficiencies are better when needed. I almost kind of equate it to the when car manufacturers started having the option to have, your big powerful V8, but when you're cruising down the highway, it drops 4 cylinders and you're in 4-cylinder mode. I'm not saying one cloud's better than the other by any means, but I'm just saying you use the efficiency when you need it and you grab the horsepower when you need it. And our belief is applications are dynamic. They're actually, we've equated them to almost like living organisms in the way apps are going to behave. They adapt to the environment, they grow, they shrink, and their needs actually constantly change. And so our approach to this is we want to make sure we can enable that without our customers having to sacrifice on, security and operational requirements.
Perfect. So as a group of technologists as we are, right, we kind of like to look at the world through the lens of just that, exactly what you said. But as a customer, they're looking at the lens of selling more widgets, whatever it is that they're in, whether it's player, product player, what have you. Do you have an example top of mind of a F5 customer who's really kind of leaning in on the edge and is kind of driving not just your requirements, but essentially their requirements going forward that you think is going to be sort of like where the rest of the herd of enterprise customers are eventually going to lead to as well? Does an example of one come to mind for you?
In the telco space, I have a couple, honestly, which may be surprising because, a lot of times I think telcos are viewed as a little bit behind some of the enterprises in like bleeding edge technology adoption, and that's mostly because of the uptime requirements and government requirements they have. But I think we have a couple of telco customers who are essentially kind of walking the walk and transforming and really building out a consolidated solution. And so they've actually built out their own full telco edge. I think they had something like 10,000 edge locations. Now those also count cell towers as edge locations because they're deploying compute at the bases of a lot of these towers. Because if they can make decisions as close to the radio network as possible, they're going to. And instead of paying to bring all that stuff back into what would be deemed as 20 centralized data centers. Right. So not only are they deploying tens of thousands of edge locations with a lightweight cloud platform that they're both partnered with and kind of building some of it on their own, they're actually starting to move IT workloads from their enterprise, right? Because their IT team is no different than any other large enterprise. They're running a massive company. And so they're actually consolidating the network infrastructure with all of the customer traffic with some of, the IT is also consuming that as a customer. Yep. And what they're trying to do is actually change their customer experience from a couple of ways. One, they're getting better insights because now things are more virtualized. They can move things around. If they need to steer traffic to a different type of analytics platform, they can. It's no longer moving cables. Yep. And two, the IT systems are actually more heavily distributed. So things like the iPhone, was the iPhone 12 launch last year. Mm-hmm. Normally they would be spending tons of money and time ramping up and deploying more firewalls, deploying more load balancers, deploying more web servers. But because they started actually distributing across the globe, when the iPhone 12 pre-order launch happened, they didn't really have to do anything but spin up more virtual instances of their services. And to them, that was actually a cost savings. And it was really a non-event. And so it was to them, it was like monumental. They were like, high-fiving and celebrating, because normally massive product launches are I don't want to call it their demise, but it's one of those things where it's like, wow, we have no idea how many people are interested in this new iPhone, and whatever number we guess, it's probably not enough. And that's usually how the last several years have gone. This year, everything just worked.
That non-event is the event, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
If you think about where they've come from in monolithic systems to more virtualized open, that non-event is the event. It's something the cloud guys, like my former employer, Microsoft, we thrived on that, right?
Yeah.
Everything worked as it should. It scaled up when it needed to. To your earlier point on efficiencies, it scaled down when it wasn't needed, and that's fantastic.
Well, I even think about you mentioned Microsoft, so I immediately I'm a retired amateur gamer. I spent a lot of time on the Xbox in my younger days, but right. I remember game launches would be, and these were still physical discs, so it was before the days of actually needing to download the game first. So I had the physical disc, and then you had to get all the downloads. And how many stories for how many years did you read? It's like Microsoft or Sony have ruined Christmas for 20 million kids because they can't get the new Call of Duty to play on Christmas Day. Right. And now you look at it, and these things are really non-events. And I think the big one that a lot of us are trying to put behind us is when the world shut down all at once for the most part, and video conferencing technologies like Teams and Zoom and WebEx, they scaled so fast, which would not have been possible, I think, even a couple of years ago. Right. And that kept business continuity going. And so I think there are multiple examples all around us of how this stuff is actually working. And we're honestly kind of getting a little bit desensitized to how amazing elastic and cloud technologies have made our lives.
Now, I'm going to go off script a little bit, James, and this wasn't in the questions.
Well, I've been off script the whole time.
Okay, great, awesome. Because you touched another nerve, which is, I'm going to generalize here, but let's say traditionally the carriers have deployed these monolithic sort of Ericsson, Nokia, whatever your flavor is, systems, and for them, deployment of more resources essentially meant buying more physical boxes and doing all that fun stuff. And now, as you rightly pointed out, there's this move to the cloud. I have seen an increasing dependence, and I'd love for you to call BS on this or add your thoughts, but I've seen an increasing dependence from carriers in using AI that really helps for them to drive the efficiencies and automation in their networks. And this is, I'm going back to the early days of Microsoft's foray into the Azure cloud, because that was my experience. Mm-hmm. And they stood up an automation platform called Autopilot, which they probably run today or some version of it today. Are you guys seeing that from your carrier engagements as well? And is it like a sort of a nice to have, or is it a critical component to scaling their resources longer term?
I don't know if I can answer the second part with anything other than just my gut. I haven't had a customer tell me, hey, without this we would have failed or something. But I believe it is actually one of the top. Based on my conversations, I think it's one of the top priorities and initiatives is to drop AI into more business decisions within the companies anywhere applicable.
Yep.
I have an example. So this was October 2019, I think. I was visiting a customer in Europe, very massively well-known global name, and I was meeting with one of their heads of architecture. And we were talking about AI. And back then I was a little bit, 2019, I was still a little bit skeptical on the real impact that telcos would get from it in the near term. And he gave me an example where they were partnered up with one of the public cloud companies that also has a massively strong brand in AI. And they partnered up and they did overlays of radio network information that they were pulling off of their own towers with maps and coverage and intelligence that this company was able to abstract off of handsets, cell phones. And they were able to actually identify towers that needed retuned based on dropped call information using the map overlays. They went through and retuned all of these, confirmed it with what their old process would have been, and it was actually more accurate than the process the telco was using.
Yep.
And the numbers that they were achieving off of the radio network were more efficient than they'd ever seen.
Sounds familiar to some of you guys.
So I became a believer. Like, I was at dinner with this person who's actually a really good friend of mine. Before they were a customer, and I, like, my jaw kind of dropped. I'm like, "Are you kidding?" And he was also, you know, kind of the same mindset of me, as like, AI's, it's cool to talk about, but I have no idea how we would ever deploy it. And he was like, dude, it was unbelievable. It's like, okay, I'm a believer.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, let's go off script one more time. I promise this is the last one. If you were to take your F5 hat off for a second, let's say you're counseling any one of our companies today. The way to engage and partner with a carrier today is different, I would argue, from, let's say, the last 5 years, which was very vendor driven. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're an Ericsson shop or whomever. What advice would you give to our founders in terms of how they can strategically position what they're doing inside a carrier conversation? And it's partly a long game and it's just partly listening, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because something that you and your team focus on, obviously.
So let's assume like access to the right people is already solved for.
Yep.
Okay. So assuming you have, just because that's actually the most difficult one to solve.
Janice shaking her head. Yep.
Yeah. So once you have access to the right people, you know, I think the interesting thing is when you're talking to the carriers, the conversations we are seeing is truly around how do you help them monetize their edge. Though that is like the most important thing to them right now, because if you think about the billions of dollars that we just saw spent globally on 5G spectrum, they need to make this money back somehow. And candidly, there's a lot of skepticism in the industry that the use cases that currently exist could have been solved with 4G. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. The use cases for 5G, I think, on paper are extremely compelling, but you get to some of these decision makers who are like, oh, well, you know, I could have done all this with 4G. So what is my 5G use case? What is my IoT use case? And when you start talking about AI, you start talking about analytics, you start talking about security, and you start talking about operational efficiency. Those are like the four use cases that will get attention from practically anybody inside the carriers all day long. Yeah. Because if they're not making money with a use case, they need to either be retaining the money or protecting the money. And so those are the things to really be focused on and really talk about. The other just bit of advice is, and this kind of goes back to access, make sure you're spending time with the right people. You know, companies even like F5, we're a well-established company. We have great relationships, but you know, you end up talking to people who in the end may or may not actually be the right person. And they'll never tell you they're the wrong person, because they're just trying to absorb as much information as possible. And so you could spend, you know, two months, you know, creating something with this customer. And then in the end, you may find out they actually aren't the right group, because telcos are extremely complex. And so, you know, especially at your stage of where you are in your company, use your friend network, check around, heck, use us as a resource. Find out if you're talking to the right people, because you can't afford to be talking to the wrong person for 2 months. So that's, I know that's not a technical advice, but that's like a practical, and you won't find out. They won't tell you.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on that. To shift gears one last time, which is how different is private enterprise 5G as F5 is looking at it compared to the carrier world? Obviously, the scale is different. That's obvious. But is the technology implementation entirely that different, other than maybe not having so much dependency on licensed spectrum and maybe going CBRS or something else?
It honestly depends on who I'm talking to. You know, I think a lot of the carriers actually don't see it as much different, because they've got the experience of operating it. So the idea would be is, hey, we want a lightweight 5G core, you know, standalone core. I know there's several companies here that are, you know, in that space in one capacity or another. And what we're seeing is the idea is, you know, a carrier would show up, try to engage with these enterprises and create a private 5G campus. No different than what they did. A lot of these large enterprises or campus or industrial environments, already outsourced, managed campus communications with Wi-Fi and, two-way radios and all this other stuff. And so I do think that's where a private 5G managed solution or managed offering actually replaces a lot of that. I've had a lot of conversations with my customers about this. And then you've got the other side of the spectrum where you have a large enterprise who can afford to have, top talent, top tech, and they may be coming directly to companies to offer up a private 5G core. They'll run it themselves, and they will use that unlicensed spectrum. Yeah. And I think in the end, it's not ultimately all that different than what the carriers would have. I do worry a little bit about the operational side of it. Stuff isn't easy. I mean, as easy as we're all trying to make it, it's still difficult. You still have to have a good understanding of how it all works. And there's a shortage of talent in this space. I mean, a lot our partner companies here are probably experiencing that when you're trying to hire people. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to find good talent. And so now not only are you competing with the carriers, you're competing with these large enterprises that can afford to hire their own talent. The cloud companies are also trying to offer this stuff up. So I think you'll see a mix of it. Ultimately, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for managed services, managed communication environment, all based on 5G.
On that note, and having spent, what is it, almost 17 years or just over 17 years at AT&T and CenturyLink and others.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of write-ups in the press about how enterprise is really the big boon for 5G, and some have gone so far as to say that the demand for spectrum from enterprises could be greater than consumer. Do you think that's a farce, or do you really see that trajectory playing out eventually?
I think the demand piece of it would be interesting, because when you look at, the appetite to spend, let's call it $10 million or $100 million on spectrum, as an enterprise, or into the billions of dollars when you're trying to get all this nationwide stuff. There's only a few companies that can really have the stomach to go do that and actually pull it off. When I say a few, obviously it's, your top Fortune companies that, so it's more than a couple, but I do think that the enterprise play is truly legitimate and real. I think the unknown is what does a large enterprise campus life look like in the next several years in terms of people on-prem? I think that's still largely up for debate of how that works. I do think industry, agriculture, and heavy commercial type stuff is still obviously going to have to be staffed and need robust communication. And I do think 5G makes the most sense. I was recently talking to and sporting venues, by the way. I was just talking to a large U.S. carrier, and going back to this edge discussion, one of the things they are talking about is actually deploying, almost like quote unquote 5G in a box into all of these different factory environments, and diminishing the reliance on Wi-Fi, because dealing with Wi-Fi propagation and handoff and all this other stuff is still not all that great. Wi-Fi, new Wi-Fi technologies are coming out constantly, but with 5G, they could go through and replace these antennas, turn it over to a 5G system. Everybody's already carrying company issued cell phones. The analytics, the reporting, the safety mechanisms, all the stuff that comes along with that baked into the technology, just outweighs trying to keep doing it with Wi-Fi. And so I think those use cases are still real. Yep. But I do think I think these companies have these large established relationships between their telco vendors and their enterprise IT shops. And so I still think it's going to be a partnership early on until it gets easier for the enterprises.
Yeah, we're actually, one of our initial use cases at the farms has nothing to do with applications. It has everything to do with finding enough CBRS compatible devices and tablets for basic POS.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're kind of scrambling to solve that basic use case.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, because again, you go back to the carriers. The carriers are working directly with the device manufacturers, and so they can steer all kinds of things. If you want to, hey, you have somebody that's going into a high risk environment, have environmental sensors on the handsets that they're carrying that immediately report back and can triangulate where they are. Use the GPS data to tell them exactly where they are, and not have to worry about handoffs or loss of signal and all this other stuff. I mean, it's actually some really cool stuff that they're working on.
Yeah. Well, my friend, we just did a crash course in everything enterprise security, app mobility, and everything else. It was always a fantastic conversation. Before we close, were there any last questions from any of our companies that wanted to get raised?
Hey, this is Petri from Tuple. So we do automation by AI for CSP. So your example was spot on. That's also what we do. For example, using RF shaping to figure out with reinforcement learning techniques that what tuning do you need to do in the networks. So but we are doing it still centrally, since there isn't really that many operators who have deployed the edge. So. Yep. What's your prediction on the speed of real practical edge deployments? I know that Japan and Korea are leading it because of their underlying infrastructure, but how do you see the rest of the world picking it up?
We're really actually seeing acceleration this year. 2020. So I get harassed a little bit because I actually said last year was the year, but I said that in 2019. And so, when the pandemic hit, everything really slowed down, and we saw a lot of companies, globally, this isn't just a telco thing, but globally we saw a lot of unpredictable investment happening because, what was the economy going to do? How fast would things recover? And now that there's a little bit of a much clearer path to, let's say, pandemic recovery, I think companies have now kind of figured out how to go about it. And so we are starting to see investment from our service providers, specifically on the edge. I think I've seen publicly stated from a couple of carriers globally that they are accelerating their edge investments. A couple here in the U.S. have been public in the last 6 months about it, and a couple over in Europe have also been public about it. So I think this year is a year we'll really start seeing some traction. I don't think you're going to be seeing the tens or hundreds of thousands of edge locations like has been predicted, but I think you'll really start seeing acceleration behind proof of concepts at the edge, new use case opportunities at the edge, and what I would call kind of like fine tuning the operational environment. And then that would get ready for a lot of the 5G standalone cores to roll out, and you start seeing a lot of these MEC use cases, because we are actually in several trials right now. We're in several trials right now for what I call like a true edge deployment inside of carriers.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for your time. Jenna and Rich for helping us coordinate today's discussion. We appreciate it as always. It's a great conversation. We have a recording, which we'll put up on the Dropbox for folks who are able to read it or watch, sit in today rather. And so with that, we really appreciate your time, James, for a great conversation as always. Thank you.
Likewise, Jim. I told Rich yesterday, I said, I always enjoy the conversations here. I think the questions I get from this group actually are, they're much deeper than the surface level. They really make you think. And so it's nice to be kept on my toes. So thank you very much.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm not sure if you've seen this picture or not, James, but we'll end on a high note. Do you see that logo right there, my friend?
It's coming up. Yeah. I love that.
That's what we're super thankful for. And Rich and Brandon and others on your team have been super awesome on that. This is the whole Project Geneva stuff. So more to come on that piece. But with that, thank you again for a great session today. We really appreciate your time and spending it with our teams.
Thank you all. Take care.